Hello and welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin, and this episode is brought to you by Testimonial Hero. Testimonial Hero helps tell your customer stories. Whether it's video, written, or designed, we can help. Head on over to testimonialhero.com to learn more. On this episode, I'm joined by Andrew Mounier, who is the head of user acquisition and growth marketing at Xembly, and we're discussing whether or not AI will take your job. It probably won't, but we're discussing it and we'll let you know. We talk about how to leverage AI for creative storytelling, which channels can benefit the most from AI, and how behind all of it, what it really boils down to is your strategic approach and how you're thinking through the problem. Hey, Andrew, welcome to the show.
So happy to be here. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. We're going to talk about AI, growth marketing, a whole bunch of stuff, but I want to start with the question, is AI going to take all our jobs?
No, I think that's the simple answer there. I'd say no, especially at its current state. I'd say as it evolves, there's going to be some new things that it can do that we couldn't even imagine right now. But I think from just the foundational side, I like to think of it as the best assistant or apprentice that you could possibly have. And that's how I utilize AI. And I tell everybody that I talk to is I can pull a lot of this groundwork and mundane things that would take us hours to manually go out and scrape and reduces that. But you still need to have the strategic aspect built into there. You still need to know why you're even doing that and utilize it in that manner.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I want to start there because just there is a bit of fear around it, but I think it's one of those things where maybe not the best example, but I'm sure when computers came out, people still wanted their old school keyboard and they didn't want to type there. There's always the holdouts. So I like the idea of using it more as an assistant. And I think, I use it in minimal amounts. It corrects my horrible writing from time to time. It helps me organize my day. But I want to hear from someone who's more involved in it like yourself. What role does it play in your day-to-day at work?
Yeah, so I think you gave some really good examples. You have like large language learning models. And so all they do is they basically scrape through all sentence structures and figure out, okay, this is the most logical next response and how you should respond to things. And so, like you said, like Grammarly has an AI component in there. That's an LLM model that they built in there and plugged in to help you with your structure and basic sentence. Use this punctuation. Oh, you forgot this. So there's some really good basic use cases that have been programmed before machine learning. And a lot of this has been layered on top of it to make it more advanced. But there's different ways that I utilize it. From a marketing standpoint, our holy grail has always been really mapping out user intent and figuring out digital body language. And so I've been in the industry 15 plus years. And I remember Oracle's Eloqua coming out and other things like that saying, hey, we can map everything for you. And you're really going to be able to do that one-to-one personalization. It's, oh, awesome. 6 months later after onboarding, going through that whole process, it's we're there, but we're missing this, or there's this other system that's not talking. There's all these things. We're getting much, much closer to actually being able to map everything out. But I think a good heuristic that I like to keep in my mind is that I don't want to be creepy. Don't be that creepy marketer that knows every single thing and you send out your first outbound message and say, hey, I saw you did this and this, and that your favorite show is Seinfeld or something like that. You don't want to do that even if you can gather that data. It's all about understanding that intent. So I'd say that from an AI standpoint and even just larger learning standpoint, we're being able to really understand one-to-one personalization a lot better than we have in the past. And we're seeing those signals pop out and that you can personalize it and still use a non-scalable method and be more manual and human on your interaction and saying, hey, approach it like a human would approach it and talk to them. So just getting that data and not trying to figure it all out yourself saves so much time.
Yeah, it's funny. Don't be creepy has been a theme anytime AI comes up when I'm talking to marketers here. And I think it's exacerbated by if you're selling to non-marketers. Like if I see something creepy, I'm like, yeah, I get it. I know the back end, how that happened. Friends see a creepy ad as I looked at shoes. Why are all these shoe companies running ads? They don't get it. They just think they're hovering over their shoulder and can see everything. So I think that's a good one. I think automating mundane tasks, productivity, those are ones people are thinking about. One that caught my eye that you said, but before we started talking here is to actually have it help with creative storytelling, which from my experience, and I'm probably not using it right, it's not so creative on the writing and storytelling side. So I'm curious your thoughts there and how that fits.
Yeah, it comes down again to that intent, right? What are you really hoping and expecting to get out of your efforts? I think from a marketer and a growth perspective, it's always reverse engineering the end goal. So if your North Star metric is a revenue number, how do you get there? And so you have to like work backwards and say, hey, I'm going to use all these different channels and these tactics to eventually get there and break it down by quarters. From a story and narrative standpoint, you have people that are coming out and saying, hey, they're prompt engineers. But it's true. You do need to understand that the input will determine the output. So if you're putting in something and just being very vague about it and say, hey, give me this amazing story about a rabbit or something that is, I don't know, trying to find a carrot and weave in a moral story or nuance inside there. It'll give you something, and maybe you'll be able to do a kid's book out of it, but it's not going to be amazing. But if you go in there and you really think about what is that end goal that you're trying to get, you pull in things like different story arches that you want to use. Like maybe you're trying to create the next Star Wars. And we've always seen that with Star Wars, they say it's, and I heard this on Nudge, I think it was Phil Agnew that was talking about this, but Star Wars was the safest, non-safe, whatever story ever created because it uses the typical archetype of a hero, the hero's journey. And that story has been told a million times. So you have to figure out something that people already connect with and can associate with, but then blend in some sort of new aspect in there. So it has the new and the old. And it's, oh, okay, this is a hit. So this point everybody knows is the hero's journey. But they didn't see it like this is in space and this is really cool. Yeah. And so by weaving those two things together, but using the fundamental archetypes in there inside your story, that can help take it to the next level. So maybe from a prompting standpoint, you go in there doing the discovery, understanding exactly what you're trying to get in there. So you're saying, okay, I want to follow this model. I need some ideas around this. I'm trying to build in this brand perspective. This is our hero. This is our anti-hero. I think what Drift made pop-up forms, the anti-hero in there. And so they're like always against pop-ups. We don't use pop-ups. We don't do this. And that's evil. So you can do this through conversational communications. So if you go in there with all those sets of prompts inside there and then just work through it, you'll get a good baseline that I think would take one person a very long time, unless they're an expert on crafting narrative and story arcs and messaging and building in all these nuances. It would take somebody a long time to do. So it all comes into that input versus the output, and knowing what you're feeding it is crucial to what you're going to get at the end of the day. And then correcting it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think more and more as it opens up and it's easier to ingest information. Like we have a paid account here, for example, with OpenAI, so there's a little bit more stuff. But I think as you can put more info in automatically rather than having to type those prompts, I think that's going to be really interesting.
Right.
Because every brand has a voice. But I think the one thing I want to call out there that you mentioned, that it's the one thing I've had success on the copywriting side on AI to make it not sound robotic, is just simple copywriting frameworks and a tone. And really dumb example of, I wanted to see how far you could stretch the tone. So I told it to wrap a story to me and pretend it's from medieval times. And it can do that. It can go boring. It can be robotic. So I think throw weird stuff out there and just see what it can actually do, and then backtrack from there.
Absolutely. And if you do it right, you get some outputs that are really solid. I usually run a poll on LinkedIn every other week or so. And I say, okay, I write, one of this is written by one of these prompts or whatever written by me. And this other paragraph is written by AI. Can you tell the difference? And a lot of people go out there and say, oh yeah, I know from a mile away, they vote on it. And I'd say 90% of the time people get it wrong. And it's not trying to trick anybody. It's just the production value can be so close to human engineered that when it comes out there, it's like, oh, wow, that makes sense. That's logically for the logical flow, everything like that. That's really solid. So it's all about the input and the output.
Yeah. And that's someone who's taken the time to put in the right input. I think the maybe less ethical way and annoying way of seeing AI used, especially on LinkedIn, is more the like for automated commenting or automated posting, where you can just tell it's regurgitating what you posted. It throws it out there in somewhat structured grammar. So I'm curious on there's a whole other ethical side as well of what AI can do with our own information, but I'm curious your thoughts on that. Like, how bad is the proliferation of bad content potentially going to be here?
Yeah. So we're already seeing it. It's, I don't know, the spam content that's popping around, that's always been around, is probably like 10, 20xing out there. I think you had a guest a few weeks ago can't quite remember his name, but he gave a really great example that, he posts something, and then as you're going through it, you just see the same thing regurgitated multiple times. Oh, that was great. Good job. Good job. It's adding zero value to the conversation. And there's basically these bots that have just been created to comment, and supposedly that helps build up your influence and stuff like that. But it goes back to my earlier point that you should use AI as an assistant and not like the end all be all to do everything for you. If you're just wanting to spam comments out there, that's been around since the internet was born. So that's going to keep going. We are seeing Google finally like crack down a little bit on it with some recent algorithm updates. Originally, it was like, what could be fine. You started seeing all these sites, their search engine traffic go up, and then they got penalized recently and just dropped. There's a lot of good use cases out there from an SEO standpoint. That's happening when you're not adding value. So I think that's the more important thing is with the commenting, just make sure you're adding value. Spend the time to use your assistant, if you're using an AI assistant, to actually add value to the conversation, not just, oh yeah, great thing, here's a summary, boom. It's like, we just read the whole thing. Why would I want to see the summary again? And then you just say, good job. So it's getting bad, but I think that's going to come down to the social media channels actually cracking down on it. There's nothing that we can really do besides that.
Yeah, and so I'm going to take it a bit of a different direction here because you mentioned Google and you're head of user acquisition.
Right.
I'm curious on the acquisition side, how you're using AI, because maybe I'm jaded. I think Google is really good at taking our money with their Google ads. And
they're great.
I don't fully trust their algorithm and their suggestions and even a lot of their automated bidding, right? So I'm curious what channels are you using your own AI in as an assistant there? And how are you doing that?
So for Xembly, our AI doesn't have a use case in user acquisition specifically. It's more of a product-led aspect to where when people are using it, it jumps up into meetings and it says, hey, it's being recorded by this, or you're interacting with it and it sends out the recordings of the meetings again. And people say, oh, who's this? Let's check it out. So it's more of reducing mundane tasks and focusing on the meaningful in an enterprise setting. From an acquisition standpoint, since we can't use our own tool for this, we found that finding communities that we can leverage that are already in the AI space is a really good place for us. Instead of building everything from the ground up, you jump into a community. Newsletters work really well. We have partnerships with Beehive, AI Tool Report, Prompt Engineer, like Superhuman. Like we've seen really good traction working with all these organizations, but it's always been, again, working backwards. What is our customer acquisition cost? What is the conversion rate that we're looking at in there? Does it make sense for us to test this out? And then we heavily monitor that as they come in and convert. So that allows us to test messaging on all these different platforms, but also know that they're inside of our space, they're early adopters. We can leverage that. Another platform that works really well for us is content syndication. So with that, I was a little hesitant, but I found that when you build something of value, we spent a lot of time and did our own research study where we dug into use cases of AI inside of companies and organizations and their adoption. So we got a lot of data that we could use that nobody else could copy, and we put together a report. And we do only work with enterprise customers, so they love the white papers, they love the ebooks and stuff like that. But we partnered up with a content syndication platform and really targeted our ICP to just these executive decision makers in larger orgs. And that brought us a good amount of qualified leads. Of course, we had to do the follow-up and personalization and everything around there, but that really helped us from a scaling standpoint. On using AI specifically, so we built a process, and I've talked to a lot of other marketers, like Coefficient has done something similar, Process Street, they've done something similar where you have a human-led strategy, but you build AI into it where you have to instruct it on the copy that's aligned with the keyword, but you break it up into a template, and then you insert other embeddable things like our white paper, a calculator, all these things, but you can push out a lot of content in a quick period of time. And then you have human editorial after that before we actually publish it. So that, from an AI standpoint, has helped create content quicker, but we have these manual processes on top of there to make sure that it's still human edited, led, and that things that are in there actually make sense. They don't make up statistics, or the sources that they're citing aren't like random things that are no longer available. So that's why we have that layer on top of that. We haven't gone out and, hey, let's do 1,000 articles this week and publish it. It's more of, let's do small tranches here of things that are aligned with our core pillar topic anyways. And so it's more of interlinking content there to show that we have that semantic relation for Google.
Yeah, it's what that always comes back to too is the strategic side, and actually, like you said, working backwards. Because the black box AI, I don't know how else to describe it, terrifies me because I don't trust any of it.
Great.
And maybe I'm just skeptical, but I think that's the key point. Like you said, think strategically about the outcome, work backwards, and then use AI to help fill in the blanks there.
Yeah,
I find it interesting. Content syndication has been working because I think, like you, I have been burnt by that in the past and haven't had success. But I think to me that just shows the type of buyer you have, and probably the buyer understanding side is why that's actually working for you.
100%. And we see a point of saturation on the email newsletter side as well. Yeah. And in every traction channel that you test out, it works. You keep testing it and say, hey, I hit a point of significance. This is awesome. Let's double down on it. And then all of a sudden it starts slowing down, or it's not having the same performance. So you always have to optimize. Like with the newsletters, we found some that worked really well, but then they didn't grow as fast as we needed them to. And so we did too many ads in there. And so the performance started to drop. So you're always finding new, platforms. With content syndication, I wouldn't say same thing, but each platform has its own syndication channels. And so you can only get in front of so many people. You have to have that strong follow-up. But whenever you're focusing on enterprise, you don't need a huge number of like people to come in and to close them for it to be a value add and actually make sense. So like you said, the market.
Yeah, and it, to me at least with that, it seems to either be the high end, like you said, enterprise, you close one or two deals, it pays for it, or the really low impulse buy side, someone can just click and buy. I've always been mid-market, which is probably why that didn't work, because the math just didn't math out there.
Yeah.
So I guess one last question here. I'm curious on the AI side.
Yeah.
I had two questions actually. One, what do you wish it could do, but it can't do yet?
Man, there's quite a few. I'd say from just a very simple thing. This is not like long-term strategy. This is something that's probably going to be fixed in, 3 to 6 months, but I'm excited about it. I'm not a graphic designer, and I'd say my skill level is paint. I pop that up and hey, I can edit some things there. That's why I have graphic designers that join me. But the stuff that you can create through Dolly, Midjourney, stuff like that, it's amazing. But the text usage, whenever you want them to write something in there, it always gets misspelled. You always have to go in there and autocorrect. That's one thing that would be great if it could actually write copy properly and not misspell it. I know that's already coming. But then I just saw Midjourney is letting you use kind of the same character multiple times throughout. Whenever you're going in there and you're prompting it to give you like this visual, it's always different. You never get the same thing. And there's no way to go in there and edit it and get the same consistent, like you get a design, you love it. Hey, can you just modify this a little bit? It doesn't do that. It's always something completely new. So if it could go in there and just have that consistency of format where you say, hey, I like, this is awesome. Now just tweak this little piece for me. That would save me so much time.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I'm similar. I think Canva makes me feel like I know what I'm doing, but
Canva's great.
I don't actually. So I'm looking forward to that as well. And then I guess to tie it back to the start thing, because you mentioned the graphic design side. You said at the start, I think my first question was, is it going to take all our jobs? Answer is no. But who do you think is maybe at risk there if they don't adapt?
Yeah. I like to go back to a conversation I had with Vinay Patenka. He's the CEO of Process Street. I had him on my podcast a few weeks ago. And I asked him a similar question, and it's a great answer. But he basically said that the individuals who are just trying to get by, just like the average performers, and they're looking at AI as, hey, this can just do all my work and just going to sit back, those people are going to be out of a job. If you're not really trying to be in that top percentile, especially in SaaS, we know how fast B2B SaaS moves. You have to be at the tip of the spear and always evolving, always adapting, pivoting really quickly. If you're just relying on these tools to do all the work for you, you're going to fall behind really quickly and get replaced, because a CEO is going to come in there with their idea like, hey, why don't we just do everything with this? It's performing the same way. And they're going to look at it, the comparison, and say, I can just use this and save all this money. Yeah. Done. So I'd say those people who are just trudging along. But if you use it not as your primary tool, but as an assistant, and you're constantly tracking your performance and having the ROI, from a marketer's standpoint, the madman days are gone. It's great to be creative. It's great to push this stuff out there, but impressions don't mean anything whenever you're raising your next round and you have to have revenue and show how this is converting. So you track your numbers and know them like the back of your hand. So I'd say those people who don't do that and just live in their like the little area of their specialization and don't see the larger impact of what they're doing and in the business, that those are probably going to be the people that are going to get passed over, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that is a good answer. And I think that kind of boils down to what you said, like use AI as your friend.
Yeah.
Don't either be scared and ignore it or think it can do everything for you.
100%.
Find that middle ground, use an assistant. Andrew, we talked about a whole bunch here. I know you talk about this and a lot more in your podcast, your newsletter, a bunch of places. So if our listeners want to connect, learn more, where should they go?
Yeah, so I'm primarily active on LinkedIn. So you can find me there as under Andrew Mounier. You'll also find all my other links there as well. So Turing's Tofu, my weekly newsletter on AI and B2B SaaS, AI Unboxed, that's the podcast that I host. So I'd say just go to LinkedIn, best place to connect. Always happy to chat.
Cool. So we'll include that link and to all the other stuff in the show notes. Andrew, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Dustin. Been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode. My key takeaway is around using AI for creative storytelling. It doesn't seem like the most obvious choice, like using AI to handle mundane tasks and automate things, super straightforward. And I'm sure most of us had played around with ChatGPT and other tools by now, and the writing is pretty robotic. So I think Andrew's tips on how to provide the correct level of detail and information on tone so you actually get a realistic, human-sounding result from AI is super important. After all, as he said, the output is only as good as the input. If you enjoyed this episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review. I always appreciate it. And I'll be back next Tuesday with a new episode.